Hi, my name is Michael Lucian, and I'm joined today with a very special guest. We have Michelle Rhee, the First Lady of Sacramento. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing today?
Very well, thanks.
Great. And we're here to talk a little bit about Measure L. I was wondering if you could tell the viewers at home what exactly is Measure L, what's going on?
Sure. So Measure L is a shift in the governance structure, the way the city is run. And right now we have a city mayor council form of government, which means that the person who is the CEO of the city is an unelected city manager. Now, as we grow as a city, it's important to evolve as well. And one of the things that we know is that 70% of the cities across the country that are the size of Sacramento have what's called a mayor council form of government, or what some people call a strong mayor form of government. So that's one of the pieces that's in Measure L. There are some other important things as well, such as an independent budget analyst. We also have an independent redistricting committee. We have a neighborhood advisory committee. And we have various ethics and transparency reforms as well. And then one of the things that most people don't know about Measure L is that there's a voter reapproval in 2020, which means that in 6 years, we try this out for 6 years. If it's working for Sacramento, then the voters will vote to make it permanent. But if it's not and people feel like it's not the right fit for Sacramento, then we would revert back to the current system.
Neat. Well, is there any reason why now? It sounds really great, but we haven't done it before, to my knowledge. Is this, why now? What's going on that motivates the change now?
Yeah. So actually, the sort of strong mayor piece of this is something that the city has talked about for a long time. In fact, a couple decades ago when Ann Rudin was the mayor, it's something that Joe Cerna and Ann Rudin and Heather Fargo actually supported, was this notion of moving to a strong mayor structure. I think now is an incredibly important time because Sacramento is on the move. We are a city on the rise. You've got incredibly exciting things happening with job creation downtown. I think the city is really rebounding from the recession. And in order to compete effectively with other cities, you have to have a nimble government. You have to have an accountable government. And so I think it's the right time to talk about this shift in government for Sacramento because of just how far we've come.
You said something about 70% of cities Sacramento size have made this decision. Are the 30% cities that can't compete, or is there a particular reason why some cities choose not to change to this strong mayor?
I think when you're talking about 70% of cities our size, that means the vast majority. So it really is a common sort of best practice. Certainly some cities have reasons for why they haven't moved to strong mayor yet. In fact, in a lot of cities, it's some kind of a crisis that brings this on, right? So the city will go through something where there will be a big corruption or a big scandal, and then they'll say, wait a second, nobody seems to be accountable, right? You have the city council, and they're pointing fingers at the city manager, and the city manager's pointing fingers at somebody else. But at the end of the day, there's no accountability. And that when something like that happens, people often say, look, we got to know where the buck stops.
Sure.
We have to have somebody who's leading the city who's directly accountable to the voters, and that's when they tend to shift. I think we have the opportunity in Sacramento not to wait for one of those crises to happen, but instead say, look, a few years ago we had a part-time mayor structure, and then as Sacramento was growing, we went to a full-time mayor. And now this is the next kind of obvious step that the city would take. And lots of cities have done this. In fact, in California, most of the large cities, whether it's LA, San Francisco, Oakland, San Diego, Fresno, they all have this mayor council form of government. And of all of those cities that have changed to a mayor council form of government, none of those cities have reverted back, and that's because it works.
Did most cities do the trial provision as well, do you know, or is that sort of
Yeah, it tends to make voters feel more secure and confident, sure. To say, well, we're going to try it out before we make it permanent. And so, yeah, in the past, other voters, like in San Diego and Oakland, they did have that voter reapproval provision. And when that provision came up, it passed overwhelmingly because people feel like, you know what, this new system works better.
You were also mentioning an ethics commission and a redistricting commission.
Yeah.
What does that look like in a strong mayor system as opposed to now? I'd heard that there'd be differences, and if we were to do those in the council way now, it wouldn't be the same.
So one of the really unfortunate things that's happened in the last few years, and my husband would say it was the low light of his career as mayor, was when redistricting happened a couple of years ago. And the way it was supposed to happen was the community put together a committee. The committee developed a number of maps that they presented to council. Council was supposed to look at those maps and then choose, in an ideal world, one of those that were brought up by the Citizens Commission. What happened at that meeting was, instead of actually looking at the commission's maps, the council members, 5 of them, had sort of conspired together to say, well, let's create a map that benefits the 5 of us, and sort of gerrymandered the district such that it would benefit those 5 council members. And then, because they had 5 votes, they passed it. And there was really nothing that the community could do, despite the fact that particularly the disenfranchised communities really got the short end of the stick. And the fact that they didn't have 5 votes meant that those communities like Oak Park really were disadvantaged in that, and they came out in record numbers to the city council hearings to complain about this and say this is wrong. But at the end of the day, they couldn't do anything about it. What the mayor is saying makes the most sense about this independent redistricting commission in Measure L is we're going to put it in the city charter that we're mandating that there is this independent commission now. And that really, there's an obligation of the council to listen to what that commission is saying. And I think that's going to mean that we're drawing districts based on good sort of common sense practices as opposed to a political process.
That sounds great. I mean, I'm sure there's people on the other side of the issue. What are they saying, and how do you respond to some of their bigger arguments?
I'd say there's sort of 2 main things that people say about why they don't want strongman mayor. One is this is too much power to vest in one person. And the reason why I don't think that argument holds any water is because currently all of those powers do sit in one person. It's the city manager. The problem with that is that you've got somebody who's making the most critical decisions facing the city every day, who's essentially anonymous. I mean, when I go to public forums, I say, raise your hand if you know who the city manager is. And nobody knows who the city manager is, right? Sure. Very few people do. And it makes folks uncomfortable to know that these decisions that are impacting our quality of life, who the police chief is, whether we're going to cut city services or add city services, those are being made by somebody who's not out in public hearing from voters every day. So that notion that somehow it's too much power for one person to have doesn't hold a lot of water, because, again, those powers sit in one person right now. It just happens to be somebody who's an unelected bureaucrat. And we're saying, let's make the person who has those authorities and those tools somebody who's directly accountable to the voters. The second thing that the opponents argue is everything is going great in Sacramento now. Why should we change things? And my husband's favorite analogy on this one is usually when he talks to people, he says, look, 10 years ago, we were all making our calls on flip phones. And back then, we didn't think there was any problem with a flip phone. We made the calls, we could communicate with our loved ones. He said, now, today, almost no one has a flip phone. We all have smartphones with different apps to do all this kind of stuff. We couldn't have imagined that before. But the reality was that there was nothing wrong with a flip phone, but we all know the smartphones are better.
Sure.
They're more efficient, they're more effective, and they help us move and do things better and faster. And that's the way that we sort of see Measure L, is that it's not so much that we're saying that the current system is broken. What we are saying is that Sacramento's on the move. We want to be a more efficient, effective government. And the way to do that is to evolve our governance structure and to make this modification. So that's kind of an analogy that my husband likes to use, and I think it's pretty effective in helping people to understand, if you're going to move with the times, if you're going to innovate, it's not necessarily about fixing something that's broken. It's about how do we become the best and live up to our potential.
Sure. Now, do you know some of the people that are in favor of this, other than your husband and yourself?
Of course.
I'm sure there are plenty of people lined up behind it as well. Can you list some of those?
I think probably one of the groups that is for this that's most surprising to people is that we have a majority of the city council. And a lot of people say, well, you know, this is vesting a lot of power in the mayor, and is it lessening the power of the council? And I think because you have a majority of the council members saying, no, we think this is good for us, we think this is going to strengthen council, it's going to strengthen neighborhoods. I think that's sometimes interesting to talk to people about. I think you have some of the most well-respected leaders in this city, people like Darrell Steinberg, Jimmy Yee, Phil Eisenberg, people who have been in this position before as a leader, and they know that they need the tools to be successful. We have the support of different community groups, whether it's Asian American, African American, Latino groups. We have neighborhood groups who are in favor of this. And a lot of people don't know this, but even the governor, Jerry Brown, actually, when he became mayor of Oakland, this was the very first thing that he did, was he put in place a strong mayor system. So even he knows that as an executive, as a leader, you've got to have the tools to be successful. And so, you know, he supports this kind of governance change as well.
Fantastic. Now, if people want more information, do you have somewhere they could go to get more information on it? I see that you've got the pins.
Yes. You can go to our Yes on L, Measure L website, where you can get a lot of the information about sort of the nuts and bolts of what's in the measure. People talk a lot about the strong mayor provision, but they don't know as much about sort of the sunset provision,
Sure.
the redistricting commission, et cetera, so you can find all that information on the website. We also have a campaign office at 16th Street and H downtown, so people are welcome to stop by anytime and just ask questions. That's the most important thing. You know, we felt very strongly that this was such an important issue that it had to go to the voters. And my husband said, you know what, whatever the voters of Sacramento say they're ready for, that's the government we should have in
Sure.
place. And so the most important thing is, you know, you got to get out to vote, and you got to be informed, and you have to really understand what the issues are.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. That was very helpful.
Absolutely.
Bye.